So the largest protest of all time is currently unfolding in the country of India, and I think it's about time that the rest of the world becomes a little bit more aware. Of course, now the media has been kind of covering this. I've seen a few articles about it. I've also seen a lot of people over on Twitter talking about it, but when it comes down to it, man, I really don't think that this is getting enough attention. I don't think this is something that people are talking about enough. And even with that, right, even with people not talking about it, I think to the degree that it should be, I think it also highlights a lot of major issues with farming in general across the entire planet. Farming obviously is one of the most vital industries to humanity. I mean, the fact that farmers don't actually get the recognition I think that they deserve is kind of insane to me, because when you really think about all of the things that we have because of farming, and because people dedicate their lives and time to that field, you know, we have the whole food supply is basically dependent on farming. Many consumer products as well also heavily depend on farming. I mean, our lives, honestly, we probably wouldn't even exist without farming. I mean, the fact that humans learned how to basically farm and stuff is kind of the big reason that society has taken the steps that it has. So I think it's first maybe time that we start giving some appreciation to farmers, but that's kind of the center focus of today's video, because the people behind the largest protest in human history are farmers. So over in India right now, there's some pretty massive protests going on. There's a lot of issues between the farmers and the government of India and large corporations, and we're going to kind of just break this all down today and talk about it. So, as of right now, there's been a lot of massive protests in a lot of the major cities over in India, but the reason that this is all kind of unfolding is pretty confusing, I would say. To put it simply, for decades now, for pretty much as long as most of these farmers have been alive, or have been at least farming, the government in India actually offered guaranteed prices for certain crops that farmers were growing. Basically, you know, hey, if you give us, you know, a bucket of corn or whatever, we'll give you $30 per barrel or whatever, right? That's probably not the terminology and things that they use, but for decades, we'll give you $40 for a bushel of wheat, which isn't even close to its market value. But they had guaranteed prices, which provided some stability, right? Because obviously farmers knew, hey, if I grow this much stuff, I'm getting this much for it. It provided stability in their lives, it's allowed them to continue farming without many hiccups, and it took a lot of the mental stress out of the job. And it let them plan for the future, which, especially in an industry like farming, is hard if not near impossible to do sometimes. But they have now passed some legislation that breaks the entire farming industry down to its core. It breaks them away from this guaranteed price system. And realistically, it benefits massive corporations. So these massive companies and whatnot can now exploit people who are farming and whatnot, and it'll help them drive down prices. It's basically like, you know, the small businesses here in the United States, right? People tell you to go shop on Main Street because, you know, the big guy's pricing them out. Walmart's pricing them out. That's kind of like the farming equivalent of what's happening in India right now, because these people have made their whole livelihoods thinking, hey, I'm going to get this from the government guaranteed price. My life will be stable somewhat. This is okay. To now, they're going to have to fight against massive corporations that obviously have all the money in the world, stepping down on them, lowering the prices, destroying their incomes, and making their jobs much harder, making it harder for them to plan for the future. And it's gotten to the point that farmers, which they could hypothetically sell at higher prices if the demand is there, but in reality, it could also lead to them having issues meeting the minimum price when the supply in the market is flooded. So if farmers produce, you know, more than usual, there's a lot of supply, this could really end up fucking up the prices for them and making them lose a lot of money. Obviously, let's say, right, it costs, you know, $5 to grow a plant, and you can sell it to the government for $10. You're pretty much, hey, I'm making a $5 profit, I can plan this for the future. But then the government says, hey, we're not doing the $10 deal anymore. In fact, now you can talk to those massive corporations over there that can price you out of pretty much anything ever. They might want to pay you like $6, $7, right? And you got to go argue with them. And the reason that it's such a massive issue in India is because around 60% of the entire population of India are farmers. Keep in mind, this is a country of 1.3 billion with a B people. It's about 4 times or so larger than the United States, almost 5 times, I think. And 60% of their population are farmers. There's more people who farm in India than there are entirety in the United States. The farmers of India themselves would probably be they'd be like the 3rd largest country on earth if you counted them all up, right? And they're also obviously the biggest voting bloc in the country. When you have 60% of pretty much anyone, that's going to be a pretty massive voting group. So they control a lot of the power when it comes down to democracy, which India is a democracy. Now, apparently around 30 or so farmer unions have talked to the government. They're very opposed to the laws, obviously, but these talks have not produced anything of value. And people are obviously getting mad, and for good reason, right? I mean, when your income is being threatened like this and the livelihood of your whole family is being threatened like this, you almost have to do something. And this isn't something that's been unfolding over just the last few days. This is actually a protest movement that has been lasting for months. That's right, the media hasn't been covering this, but Indian farmers have been basically revolting for months. Around 150 farmers have died during the course of all this from a bunch of different things. There's been suicides, there's been car accidents, freezing to death, and there's not even an official figure on how many people have died protesting, which some of the protests have turned extremely violent. There's been clashes with riot police that have led to tear gas and batons being used on the crowds. And the Indian government is cracking down very hard about this. They don't want people saying anything about this. They don't want the world knowing about this, which is pretty fucked up. So, just back on Saturday, Mandeep Punya, who was a freelance journalist covering the protests, he was arrested on the border between Delhi and Haryana. I mispronounced the hell out of that. But he has also been remanded to judicial custody for 2 weeks from Sunday. He was accused of obstructing a public servant from discharging duty and voluntarily causing hurt and assault or criminal force to deter a public servant from duty. And on top of that, the Indian government has started to implement internet restrictions in some of the areas where protests are very high. Internet access has been suspended in around 14 of 22 districts in Haryana state near New Delhi, which ends on 5 p.m. Monday, unless, of course, it gets extended or changed, which is according to the Department of Information and Public Relations, and a 48-hour internet shutdown was imposed in 3 other areas around Delhi's borders on Friday. So we've essentially gotten to the point where these protests are causing, such a big ruckus, they're, causing such a big issue against the government of India, that they're restricting internet access. Now, the reason that they're restricting internet access is pretty simple. I mean, people are talking about the protests, they're using social media to plan them, they're sharing footage from them, and the government doesn't want that stuff getting out. Obviously, they already have a big enough issue on their hands with the protests themselves. I mean, they got to deal with literally 60% of their country being pissed off at them at the same time. That's a lot to face all at once, I will say, but I mean, at the end of the day, I think these people have a right to be upset. I think these people have a right to be mad, and I think that there should be justice for them. I mean, nobody ever wants to see their livelihood be messed with like this. Nobody ever wants to see something like that happen. I mean, I understand that this is something that's happening in a different country, another area of the world, but this is an issue that stems far deeper than just the country of India. I mean, here in the United States, farmers are very underappreciated. They are stepped on fucking constantly, and it's sad. I mean, when you look at the statistics, farmers are, at least here in the United States, much more likely to commit suicide than the average person because of their job being so volatile. They can't really plan very well for the future a lot of the times. A lot of them have been very hard hit by COVID and other issues that have kind of affected them over the last few years. I mean, farmers around the world, honestly, are quite underappreciated, and I realize that that's not necessarily the issue here. The issue is that they're literally being stepped on by the government and big corporations, to be honest. But it's something that needs to be addressed, and I think people need to actually become more aware of what happens to farmers and, what their lives are like. I mean, we're seeing the farmers in India stand up right now for what they believe in, and the world didn't pay attention until just now. I literally just found out about this over the last few days. And these are hundreds of millions of people that are being affected, a very significant portion of the world. And these people are being stepped on and nobody has said anything until now. Obviously now, the reason I think why people are starting to say something is it's impossible not to notice. I mean, when you got a government shutting the internet off, which is fucking horrible in the first place, it gets pretty noticeable really quick. And I think a lot of this is more of the Streisand effect, I think is what it's called. I think the more that the Indian government continues to push back against farmers and treat them as disposable resources that they can profiteer from, I think you're going to see more of these kinds of protests. I understand that, they don't want people getting violent and things like that, but I mean, these people have been trying to come to a conclusion that's good for a long time, and the government's not helping, man. And the government, in fact, also doesn't want this out, and there's a good reason why, because they're in the wrong. Now, it's kind of crazy, though, to see, because India is a democracy, right? They have elections and everything. It's kind of insane to see the world's largest democracy reacting this way to these protests, right? They're restricting internet access. I mean, here in the United States, that seems virtually unheard of, at least Like, over the last year, obviously, there's been a lot of protests in the United States, right? The Black Lives Matter movement, marches all across, like, thousands of cities. We just had the Capitol storming and whatnot by the Trump supporters. And even at the worst of these things, right, with whole city blocks, like, just being overran by protesters and, like, buildings being burned down and police getting in clashes and literally the Capitol fucking building being stormed. The government didn't shut the internet off, right? I think that that's something that people need to take notice of, too. So this whole situation, I think, needs to become more publicly aware, okay? Especially, like, here in the United States and in the West, because this is quite important. This is world history right here. This is the largest protest of all time, and it's only going to get larger from here, I think. So with that being said, thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're brand new around here on the channel, follow me over on Twitter and Twitch at @SubToOptimus. Make sure to check out Shop Opti down below. Thank you to my channel members. Your support helps my channel tremendously. And until my next video, guys, this is Optimus, well, standing with the farmers in India and signing out. You've seen cool stuff in your life before, but you've never seen cool shit like this. Introducing Horser. Are we sure what it is? Not really, but is it interesting? Absolutely. Optimus, what do all these luxury cars and videos of horses and nature have to do with Horser? They're specially crafted in that order to make you want to buy shit. To make you think to yourself, oh, this Horser brand represents luxury and wealth and nature, and I need that. So fulfill the advertisement's role and go buy it. Horser, keep it on you, or some shit like that.